And we're live here. Hello, everyone, and good evening. I know this is a late tea time with Tia, but I don't know. I just felt like doing it. But yeah, so as you can see from the title, this is Tea Time with Tia, The Punisher versus John Wick. Now, I know that this topic has been done before. It's nothing really new, but as probably one of the only people who hadn't seen any of the John Wick movies previously from today, I decided I wanted to actually do this video. That is correct. Prior to today, I have not seen one single John Wick movie. And then this afternoon, my boyfriend and I decided to binge the entire trilogy. And wow, I certainly can see why everyone is such a huge fan of these John Wick movies. Keanu Reeves is really good in the role. I enjoyed personally every single one, although I will say that I probably thought that the first one was the best one out of the trilogy, but that's just my personal opinion here. The third one certainly was great, even though I think that some people may have had a little bit of a mixed reaction towards it as opposed to the previous two. But I like where it left off. It certainly took me a little by surprise, and I'm looking forward to the fourth one. But let me take a sip right here. My throat is parched. So yeah, as someone who is a huge fan of the Punisher series, specifically Punisher from Daredevil season 2 and the Punisher seasons 1 and 2 on Netflix, I really saw a lot of similarities between Frank Castle and John Wick, and I thought, who would win in a fight? Now, of course, this is a comparison of John Wick and then live action version of Frank Castle, specifically John Bernthal's version of Frank Castle, because I'm not well versed enough in the comic realm to kind of make any sort of accusations or comparisons. So this is strictly from the standpoint of someone who was and is a huge fan of the Marvel Netflix series. Let me tell you guys that my introduction to John Bernthal obviously started with Daredevil season 2. Loved his introduction, loved his whole entire storyline, and then enjoyed seasons 1 and 2 of The Punisher, and was thoroughly upset and disappointed when both Daredevil and Punisher were subsequently canceled, because I needed more John Bernthal as Frank Castle in my life. Now, both Frank Castle and John Wick have a love of dogs. We see that John Wick's story essentially starts with the death of his dog that his deceased wife had given as a gift, as a last gesture before she passed away. And that's also another thing that you can compare Frank Castle with John Wick, is that they both lost the loves of their lives, although both in a different fashion. John Wick lost his wife to a disease, whereas Frank Castle's wife was shot and killed. So, but still, so you have that comparison. They both love their dogs. When Frank Castle's dog is hurt by the Irish in episode 4 of Daredevil season 2, Frank Castle obviously is pissed. So yeah, there's a lot of comparisons, a lot of similarities that I saw, and obviously the biggest one is that both seem to be indestructible. There are plenty of times that Frank Castle has been beaten up, hurt, and has just continued to take those bullets, those wounds, and kept going. At the end of Punisher season 1, I don't know honestly how he survived the attack against Agent Orange and Billy Russo, because he really was just at the brink of death. And it was something that I was talking to my boyfriend with, that I don't really understand how John Wick survived the end of the third movie. Now, my boyfriend Paulie says that it's because he didn't fall straight down, but I don't know. He fell high enough and he hit enough things on his way down that certainly should have killed him. But both John Wick and Frank Castle possess the power of just sheer determination and stubbornness and refusal to die. So who would win? We have Frank Castle, who is a former Marine, obviously has his training from being a Marine, a very good one at that. There were flashbacks in The Punisher season 1 of him just kind of annihilating enemy forces. So his brutal strength didn't just start when he became the Punisher, but certainly he has a style to him that is just this like, he's very smart. We've seen Frank Castle as a very smart person, planning, very calculating, but once he kind of goes in, he kind of just dives right in, and he is about as much of a cannon ball just barreling towards people. Whereas John Wick, we kind of have somewhat of an insight of where he got his training. Clearly, some from some Russian organization that he grew up in, which kind of, you would say, gives him a lot more years. That doesn't sound right, but he had a lot more years of training than Frank Castle, I would say. His type of fighting style is also similar in the sense that once he starts, he really doesn't stop. Every single movie is like one continuous fight, but I would say that John Wick has a bit of a flair for being a little stealthier than Frank Castle. John Wick kind of he utilizes the whole art of staying behind pillars in the darkness and making his attack when he sees that it would be the most effective. Whereas, we've seen Castle is the loudest person. Once he went into the hospital in the first episode of Daredevil season 2, he's shouting, he's, shooting things, making a loud noise. His same style kind of in the prison fight scene. We have him against Billy Russo in the first season of The Punisher, where, even though he was kind of hiding a little behind, like, say, a dumpster or a tree, once he made his way out, he just fully went full force. Same thing in Punisher season 2. He was just Frank Castle is just always the person that I don't think he really sees the point in really hiding. He wants you to know that he's planning on fighting you and he's going to fight you. Whereas, say, John Wick is definitely the Baba Yaga, the boogeyman. So in that retrospect, I think that in a fight between the two, they would be pretty evenly matched in a hand-to-hand combat, simply because we saw that Frank Castle can really, he's not just someone who uses guns. He can use his fists. He went toe-to-toe with Daredevil, and Matt Murdock is probably one of the best fighters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, at least on a TV show level, although I'll argue that those Daredevil fight scenes were some of the best in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And yes, I still count the Netflix shows as canon. They certainly were when they were on. They connected enough to the bigger Marvel Cinematic Universe, the film universe. So just because they were canceled, I don't think that they're not canon at this point. So but yeah, so Frank Castle has a great hand-to-hand combat ability. So does John Wick. He certainly can stand on his own against multiple people, just like Frank Castle can. And as far as, say, like with weapons, John Wick certainly, I think John Wick and Frank Castle could be evenly matched with their ability with their gun fight. John Wick is really precise. There was something I noticed in the first movie that kind of they strayed away from in the second and third, but that was that John Wick rarely wasted bullets. If he shot someone, it was usually just one shot in the head or in the heart or something. He didn't bother with multiple bullets. He just shot and kept going on his way. But that was something I feel like they strayed away from a little in the second and the third one. He was, in my opinion, at times wasting a few bullets. There really didn't seem to be a point to him shooting someone multiple times in the head. That just didn't seem like something John Wick from the first movie would do. But Frank Castle was a sniper. He even says in Daredevil season 2 to Karen, if I had wanted you dead, you certainly would have been dead, in referral to him using a shotgun against Karen as she was fleeing from the hospital with, I forgot the guy's name now, but you guys know who I'm talking about. So Frank Castle certainly knows what he's doing with guns. Put a gun in his hand and he's gonna take you down pretty much. So I think, again, hand-to-hand combat and gunfight, Frank Castle and John Wick are pretty evenly matched. I would say where John Wick has the advantage is his knife play. We saw, especially in the third one, that he really knows what he's doing with knives, clearly has trained extensively with them. And it's not just knives, it's with swords. And that's something that Frank Castle really, we've never seen him with a sword. Certainly we've seen him with knives, especially a kitchen knife, i.e. Daredevil season 2, where he and Karen were in the diner, and then he took out those two guys. But besides that, we've never seen him with a sword or anything like that. I just don't think that that's Frank Castle's style, but that would be where John Wick would excel. And they clearly both can fight through tremendous pain. John Wick losing a finger, getting branded on his back, Frank Castle getting stabbed 1,000 times, shot, beaten to a absolute bloody pulp. I mean, these two men, as I said earlier, are just like superhuman without being superhuman. But I would say, and this is a difficult decision for me because part of me really wants to give it to Frank Castle just because of how big of a fan I am of Frank Castle. And I truly think that up against, say, any of the Defenders, he would win. And yes, I'm including Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. He would find a way. Maybe he wouldn't be able to go up against, say, Luke Cage in a hand-to-hand combat, but Frank Castle, he always knows kind of how to take his enemy down. And he would get, say, those bullets from the first season of Luke Cage that could actually pierce Luke Cage's skin. So that's the thing. Frank Castle always comes prepared. So that's where he would excel. He would know that John Wick is, if he knew who John Wick was, he would know that he can excel in sword play, and I think that Frank Castle would prepare in that sense. But if he just met John Wick for the first time, it may be a little more difficult. Again, Frank Castle is a really good fighter, hand-to-hand combat, but his fighting style is more military, where John Wick's is a little bit of a mixture of martial arts. So he would certainly be using his legs more. He would be kind of crouching and rolling on the floor a little bit more than Frank Castle. So I believe that Frank Castle is probably bulkier than John Wick. It's a really hard thing. I think they would be super evenly matched. First of all, I don't think that Frank Castle and John Wick would fight to begin with. They would both just kind of hang and talk about their deceased wives and talk about their love for dogs and not really care. And they'd probably go and beat some pedophiles up, and that would be awesome. But I guess if John Wick had a contract against Frank Castle, or he was fulfilling a contract against Frank Castle, then he would have to take Frank Castle down. And, Frank isn't going to just simply let himself be killed. If he knows someone's after him, he's going to not necessarily let them go. Both of them shoot without hesitation. In the first John Wick, when John Wick finally got to be face-to-face with Yosef, he just shot him without any sort of confrontation or anything. And that reminded me a lot of the end of Punisher Season 2, where Frank Castle just shot Billy Russo, didn't even bother exchanging any words whatsoever. So it's a really hard choice for me. But I guess if I have to say something, I'm going to say John Wick. And that's not because I just watched the movies and I'm trying to put in favor of John Wick. I simply think that his sword play would be where he has the advantage, because I think they're so evenly matched in their hand-to-hand combat and their use of guns. The fact that John Wick has his mixed martial arts, and his sword play would be completely to his advantage. Mostly his sword play, because Daredevil, Matt Murdock, also had a mix of martial arts knowledge, but Frank was still able to kind of outdo him. So it would really be John Wick's advantage of being stealthy and his sword play that I think would really just be in his advantage. So yeah, either way, it could go either way, depending on who's having the better day, I suppose. And I love both. And I think, again, as I said, that they really wouldn't even bother fighting. But if I had to choose one, if it was a life or death situation and I had to choose, I would choose John Wick to win. But certainly John Wick would walk away with a shit ton of bruises, broken teeth, broken bones, maybe a missing finger or two. Frank Castle would not go down without a fight. And yeah, so that's pretty much the conclusion of my Punisher versus John Wick. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. You can, of course, follow us, geekvibesnation.com. From there, you can find our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Vero, and YouTube accounts, and you can let us know anywhere who you think would win in a fight, Punisher versus John Wick. And of course, follow me at on Instagram and Twitter, Tia Fabi. I'm just super interested in knowing. I just love these type of films, and it makes me really excited for a fourth John Wick, and really sad that we're not getting a third Punisher season. But yeah, thanks for listening in on this relatively quick tea time with Tia, and I hope to see you guys next time. See ya. End stream.